The clatter of the dropped plate was the only sound before the death warrant was signed. In the hushed elegance of Il Tramonto, silence wasn't golden, it was blood-red. A nervous busboy had just knocked a bowl of chirpino onto the lap of the most revered woman in Little Italy, Kora Finucci, the iron-willed mother of New York's most feared Don. Silverware stopped midair. Crystal glasses froze at lips. Sylvio Finucci, the Don himself, rose from his chair like a panther uncoiling, his hand already reaching for the silver-plated beretta tucked beneath his jacket. The busboy's apologies came out in broken sobs. But then a voice, quiet, steady, and impossible, cut through the thick air of violence. It wasn't pleading in English. It wasn't begging in modern Italian. It was Siciliano Antico, the old tongue of Mediterranean nobility, a dialect that hadn't graced these streets in half a century. Every head turned. It was just the waitress who refilled water glasses. But the words that flowed from her mouth would rewrite the entire underworld. If you're feeling that chill down your spine right now, hold on tight. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just another Mafia story. This is the tale of how a waitress brought the most feared crime family in New York to their knees using nothing but words from a dead language. My analytics show that 82% of you listening aren't subscribed yet. But if you want to discover how Maya's hidden knowledge becomes the key to surviving the underworld, hit that subscribe button now. Because in the next few minutes, you'll learn why the most dangerous person in Little Italy wasn't carrying a gun. She was carrying a secret. Now, let's dive into Maya's world. Maya Preston had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. In a place like Il Tramonto, invisibility wasn't merely useful, it was the difference between breathing and bleeding. The restaurant, nestled in the cobblestone heart of Little Italy, was a monument to Old World power and New World money. Tuscan frescoes adorned walls that had witnessed more confessions than any church, and the wine collection in the cellar was worth more than Maya would earn in 20 lifetimes. It was the jewel in the crown of the Finucci Empire. Maya smoothed her black apron, keeping her gaze fixed on the scuffed hardwood as she moved between tables. She was 24, with dark hair she kept pulled back in a severe braid and a white button-down shirt she'd deliberately chosen one size too large. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there to survive a past that had nearly swallowed her whole. Preston. The sharp snap of Vincent's voice, the floor manager, a nervous man with perpetually damp temples, made her flinch. Table 7 needs bussing. Now. La Signora is coming down from the private room. Vincent's eyes darted toward the spiral staircase as he wiped his palms on his slacks. The Don is with her. The Don? Maya's voice came out barely above a whisper. Sylvio. He's on edge tonight. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Clear the table and disappear. Maya nodded, her pulse thrumming in her throat like a trapped bird. Everyone knew Sylvio Finucci. He wasn't just a mobster, he was a legend whispered about in trembling voices. At 34, he consolidated power faster than any boss in the city's blood-soaked history. They called him Il Lupo, the wolf, silent, calculating, and utterly without mercy. She hurried toward table 7, a corner booth bathed in amber lamplight. As she began stacking dessert plates, the entire restaurant shifted. The music didn't stop, but something fundamental changed in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. Maya's alarm clock screamed at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before it was supposed to. She slapped it silent and lay in the darkness of her studio apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of Sicily. She tried not to see the irony in that. The radiator clanked and hissed, offering barely enough heat to take the edge off the February cold seeping through the single-pane window. She counted to 10, an old ritual from childhood, then swung her legs out from under the threadbare quilt her grandfather had brought from Palermo. The floor was ice against her bare feet. $43.16. That's what she had left until Friday's paycheck, and rent was due in 4 days. Maya did the math again as she brushed her teeth with a toothbrush she should have replaced 2 months ago, the numbers arranging themselves in neat columns in her mind the way her grandfather had taught her. 60 for rent, 12 for the electric bill, 15 for the subway card. That left her with about $8 a day for food, soap, and the phone she kept charged in case she needed to run. She always needed to be ready to run. In the cracked mirror above the sink, she studied her reflection with clinical detachment. Dark circles under hazel eyes, cheekbones that had grown too sharp from skipped meals. She pulled her hair back with practiced efficiency, twisting it into a braid so tight it made her scalp ache. Pain was good. Pain kept you alert. The walk to the subway took 12 minutes through streets that still smelled like last night's garbage and broken promises. Maya kept her head down, her shoulders curved inward, making herself smaller. She'd learned to navigate the city like a ghost, never memorable enough to warrant a second glance. No eye contact. No conversation. No trace. But every day, the fear followed her like a shadow with teeth. Every stranger's face could be the one who recognized her, recognized the set of her jaw, the unusual amber flecks in her eyes, the way she moved that was too careful, too controlled. Someone who remembered the name Lombardi and the blood debt still unpaid. On the air train, pressed between a man reading yesterday's post and a woman with her eyes closed, Maya counted the stops to Canal Street and reminded herself of the only truth that mattered. As long as she stayed invisible, she stayed alive. Maya's hands were still shaking as she untied her apron in the staff room. 2 hours had passed since the incident with Kora, and the restaurant had finally emptied. She'd spent those hours moving through her tables like a sleepwalker, certain that any moment someone would grab her arm and demand answers she couldn't give. She reached for her coat, desperate to disappear into the February night. "Leaving so soon, Signorina?" The voice came from the doorway, smooth as aged whiskey, sharp as broken glass. Maya's blood turned to ice. Sylvio stood blocking her only exit, still dressed in the charcoal suit he'd worn at dinner. Up close, he was more terrifying than the stories suggested. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seemed to calculate the exact weight of your soul. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, the only imperfection on an otherwise aristocratic face. I was just heading home, sir." Maya kept her gaze fixed on the third button of his shirt. "Sir." He stepped into the room, and suddenly the space felt impossibly small. How formal. Especially for someone who spoke to my mother like family. "I didn't mean any disrespect. I was only trying to help. Where did you learn it?" His voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. "That dialect. My mother hasn't heard her grandfather's tongue spoken that perfectly since she left Corleone 70 years ago." Maya's mind raced through a dozen lies, each one crumbling before she could voice it. I had a good ear for languages. Basta." The command cracked like a whip. "Don't insult my intelligence, ragazza. That wasn't something you picked up from a phrase book. You were raised in it. Taught by someone who knew the old ways." He moved closer, and Maya instinctively backed against the lockers. "So I'll ask you again. Who are you?" The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Maya could hear her own heartbeat, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with cigar smoke and something darker, gunpowder, maybe, or just raw power. "My name is Maya Preston," she whispered. "Your legal name, perhaps?" Sylvio's eyes narrowed. "But I've made 3 phone calls since dessert was served." Maya Preston appeared in New York 4 years ago with paperwork so clean it's obviously forged. No history. No family. No past. He leaned in until she could see the gold flecks in his dark irises. "So tell me your real name, or I'll have my men find out the hard way." Maya's throat constricted. The walls were closing in. "Lombardi," she breathed. "Maya Lombardi." Sylvio's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, recognition, calculation, perhaps a trace of surprise. He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his jacket, lit one with a silver lighter that caught the harsh fluorescent light. Lombardi. He exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. The scholar's granddaughter. I thought you were all dead. Maya's knees nearly buckled. You knew my grandfather? Of him. Lorenzo Lombardi, the man who could read inscriptions that hadn't been deciphered in centuries. The man who authenticated documents for families that Rome itself had forgotten. Sylvio studied her through the haze of smoke. Also the man who made powerful enemies by refusing to translate something he shouldn't have seen. They killed him for that. Maya's voice cracked. Burned our villa. Murdered everyone who carried our name. Not everyone. Sylvio tapped ash into a coffee mug someone had left on the counter. You're here. Which means you're exactly what I need. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, aged and delicate, covered in spidery handwriting. He placed it on the table between them like a card in a high-stakes game. 3 weeks ago, my mother started receiving letters. Hand-delivered. No postage. No return address. His jaw tightened. They're written in a dialect so old, so regional, that not even the translators I pay a fortune can make sense of them. But my mother understands enough to know their threats. Maya's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. The script was archaic, the words flowing in the formal cadence of pre-war Sicily. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory as she read. The daughter of wolves drinks from a poisoned well. The debt of betrayal comes due when the moon wanes. Blood answers to blood, and the old stones remember. There are 7 more, Sylvio said quietly. Each one more specific. Each one describing things only someone from the old families would know, the layout of my mother's childhood home, the names of cousins who died 50 years ago, the location of family graves that aren't on any map. Maya looked up, her throat dry. Someone from Sicily is coming for her. Not just someone. The letters are signed with a seal I haven't seen in decades. Sylvio's expression hardened into something cold and lethal. The Council of Shadows. The families that ruled Sicily before Mussolini, before the modern Cosa Nostra. Families that your grandfather betrayed when he refused their commission. Maya's blood ran cold. And now they know I'm alive. The Finucci estate sat in Brooklyn Heights like a fortress disguised as elegance, 3 stories of limestone and wrought iron, with gardens that somehow flourished even in winter. Maya stood in the marble foyer clutching a garbage bag containing everything she owned, feeling like an imposter in a museum. This way, Signorina. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Lucia with silver hair and eyes like a hawk, led her up a sweeping staircase that probably cost more than Maya's entire building. Your room is in the East Wing. You'll take meals with the family. Signora Finucci insists. The room wasn't a room. It was a suite larger than her entire apartment. Cream-colored walls, a 4-poster bed draped in silk, windows overlooking the garden. A wardrobe stood open, revealing dresses Maya had only seen in magazine spreads. Emerald silk. Midnight velvet. Dove-gray cashmere. Signor Finucci had these sent over this morning, Lucia said, running her hand along a burgundy gown. You're to dress appropriately for dinner. 7 o'clock sharp. When the door closed, Maya sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her reflection in the gilt mirror across the room. The girl looking back wore a stained white button-down and black slacks that had been washed so many times they'd gone gray. She didn't belong here. But she also couldn't leave. Sylvio had made that clear during the silent car ride from the restaurant. The council knew she existed now. If she ran, they'd find her within a week. Her only chance of survival was staying close to the Finucci family's protection and earning it by translating those letters. By 7, she'd managed to wrestle herself into the emerald dress. It fit perfectly, which somehow made everything worse. She'd left her hair down at Lucia's insistence, dark waves spilling over her shoulders in a way that felt too visible, too exposed. But as she descended the staircase toward the dining room where voices murmured in Italian, Maya forced herself to remember every lesson her grandfather had taught her. The powerful never see the servants, nipotina. And that is the servant's greatest weapon. She might be wearing silk now instead of polyester, but she could still watch, still listen, still catalog every detail with her waitress eyes. The bodyguard who favored his left leg. The underboss who drank too much wine. The way Sylvio's jaw tightened when his consigliere whispered in his ear. Maya had survived 4 years by being invisible. Now she'd survive by being underestimated. Maya found Kora Finucci in the conservatory 3 days later, surrounded by lemon trees that somehow thrived despite the February frost pressing against the glass walls. The old woman sat in a wicker chair, her gnarled hands wrapped around a cup of espresso, staring at nothing. "Permesso?" Maya asked softly in the formal Sicilian dialect. Kora's head turned slowly, her dark eyes, so like her son's, assessing. "Avanti. Sit, child." Maya settled into the chair opposite, acutely aware that this moment mattered more than any translation she'd provided. Sylvio's protection meant nothing if his mother decided Maya was a threat. "You remind me of my sister," Kora said finally, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "Juliana. She had your same careful way of moving, like a dove among hawks." The old woman's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "She was the smart one. I was the one who fell in love with a wolf. Your husband, Antonio." Kora's eyes grew distant. "He brought me to this cold, hard city 52 years ago and promised me we'd return to Corleone when we'd made our fortune. But fortunes have a way of chaining you to the place you earned them." Maya understood that particular kind of exile. "You miss the light," she said quietly. "The way it hits the valley at sunset. The smell of the zagara blossoms in spring." Kora's cup rattled against its saucer. "See. How do you?" "My grandfather's villa overlooked the hills above Enna. Close enough to see Corleone on clear days." Maya's throat tightened. "He used to say Sicily gets into your bones. That even if you leave, you carry it like a second skeleton." For a long moment, the only sound was the soft drip of water from the irrigation system. Then Kora reached across the small table and placed her weathered hand over Maya's. "Everyone here speaks Italian," the old woman whispered. "They wear the clothes, eat the food, cross themselves before meals. But they don't understand. Not the way the old country shaped you. Not the weight of blood and stone and histories that don't translate." Her grip tightened. "You know what it means to carry a name that's both a crown and a target." Maya's eyes burned. "Yes, signora." "Kora," the old woman corrected. "And you will have your coffee with me every morning. I have 70 years of stories, and finally someone with ears to hear them properly." In that moment, Maya realized she'd just gained something more valuable than Sylvio's protection. She'd gained his mother's trust. Marco Tesoro was Sylvio's right hand, a man in his 50s with silver at his temples and a smile that never reached his eyes. He'd been translating the council's letters alongside Maya, supposedly to verify her work. But something had been nagging at her for days, a wrongness she couldn't quite name. Until she found the discrepancy. Maya sat in the estate's library at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, comparing her translations to the summaries Marco had provided to Sylvio. The 8th letter lay before her, its archaic script dancing in the lamplight. Her translation: "The old debts may be forgiven if the daughter of wolves bows before the council. Pride before reconciliation brings only ash." Marco's summary to Sylvio: "The council demands complete surrender and the dismantling of Finucci operations in New York. Refusal means war." Her hands went cold. She pulled out the previous letters, laying them side by side. One by one, the pattern emerged like a constellation revealing itself. Where Maya had translated offers of negotiation, Marco had reported ultimatums. Where the council had suggested dialogue, Marco had manufactured threats. He was engineering a war. The question was why, and what happened to Maya when she exposed him. Marco had been with the Finucci family for 30 years. He commanded loyalty from half the soldiers. He had Sylvio's ear in ways Maya, a stranger who'd been here barely 2 weeks, never would. If she accused him and Sylvio didn't believe her, she'd be dead by morning. If she stayed silent and the war came, Kora would be the first target. Maya's grandfather had died for refusing to betray his principles. She'd survived 4 years by keeping her head down, by never taking risks, by being invisible. Every instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, to let the powerful men destroy each other while she slipped away in the chaos. But Kora's voice echoed in her memory. You carry a name that's both a crown and a target. The Lombardis had been scholars, truth-tellers, keepers of the old ways. Her grandfather had died rather than mistranslate a document. Could she do less? Maya gathered the letters with shaking hands and walked toward Sylvio's study. Light still glowed beneath the door. He kept the same sleepless hours she did. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. This moment would either save her life or end it. She knocked twice. That knock just changed everything. Maya is about to walk into that room and accuse the most trusted man in the Finucci Empire of betrayal. One wrong word, one moment of hesitation, and she's dead. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, you understand why stories like this need to be told. These moments of courage, when ordinary people make extraordinary choices, this is what I live for. Make sure you're subscribed because what happens behind that door will determine whether Maya becomes a victim or a legend. The next scene is about to blow your mind. Avanti, came Sylvio's voice from within. Maya pushed open the door, the letters clutched against her chest like a shield. We need to talk about Marco. The gunfire started at 4:32 a.m. Maya jolted awake to the sound of shattering glass and men shouting in Italian. Not the refined dialect of the old families, but the harsh Roman accent of hired guns. She threw off the silk sheets and ran to the window in time to see muzzle flashes lighting up the garden like deadly fireflies. The estate's alarm shrieked to life. Her door flew open. Sylvio stood there in a black shirt and shoulder holster, a gun in each hand. Get dressed. Now. What's happening? The council sent their answer. His face was granite. They're here for my mother. Maya's blood turned to ice. Marco's arrest 2 days ago had clearly triggered this, a final, desperate play by whoever had been paying him to start a war. She yanked on jeans and a sweater, her mind racing through the estate's layout. The layout she'd memorized from the letters. The council's threats had referenced architectural details, the Sala Segreta, the hidden room where old families concealed their valuables. Maya had assumed they were talking about Kora's childhood home in Sicily, but what if? The wine cellar, she gasped. There's a safe room. The letters mentioned it, where the wolves store their silver beneath the feast hall. I thought it was metaphorical, but... Sylvia's eyes snapped to hers. Show me. They found Kora in the hallway, Lucia at her side, both women clutching rosaries. The bodyguards were already falling back, outgunned by what sounded like a small army hitting the front entrance. This way. Maya grabbed Kora's arm and ran toward the kitchen, Sylvio covering their retreat with controlled bursts of gunfire. Down the servants' stairs. Through the massive kitchen where copper pots swung on their hooks from the concussion of explosions above. The wine cellar stretched into darkness, rack after rack of bottles worth fortunes. Maya's hands shook as she searched the far wall, remembering the letter's description, beneath the crest of the crowned wolf. There, carved into the stone. A wolf's head wearing a crown, so weathered it was nearly invisible. She pressed it. The wall groaned and swung inward, revealing a reinforced room lined with communications equipment and weapons. A panic room built by men who understood that power always comes with a price. Inside, Sylvio commanded, pushing his mother through. Lock it behind us. As the stone door sealed shut and the sounds of battle became muffled thunder, Kora pulled Maya into a fierce embrace. You saved us, child. The summit was held in neutral territory, a private room at Rouse in East Harlem, where the ghosts of 100 negotiated truces lingered in the garlic-scented air. Maya sat between Sylvio and Kora at a table that held more power than most corporate boardrooms, facing the council's representatives who'd flown in from Palermo. Don Salvatore Greco sat at the center, 90 years old and sharp as Venetian glass. Flanking him were his sons and the heads of 3 other Sicilian families, men who wore their ancestry like armor. "So this is the Lombardi girl," Don Greco said, his eyes cataloging every detail. "Lorenzo's granddaughter. We heard you burned with the rest." Maya met his gaze without flinching. "Quasi, Don Greco." "Almost. But not quite." She'd chosen her words carefully, using the ancient formal register that implied equal standing. Several of the younger men bristled, but Don Greco's lips twitched. "Your grandfather was a stubborn fool," he continued in the old dialect. "We offered him a fortune to translate the Medici scrolls. He refused." "He refused because the scrolls were forgeries," Maya replied smoothly. "Created to legitimize land claims in Calabria that would have displaced 3,000 families. My grandfather may have been many things, but he wasn't a man who'd authenticate lies for money." The room went silent. Don Greco leaned forward. "And how would you know this?" "Because I was 12 years old, sitting at his feet when he examined those scrolls. He spent 3 days proving they were fakes before he sent you his refusal." Maya's voice remained steady. "He also kept his documentation. All of it. Names, dates, forensic analysis. Stored with a notary in Enna with instructions to release it publicly if anything happened to our family. It was a bluff, a magnificent, terrifying bluff. But she delivered it in the cadence of absolute truth, using the verbal patterns that signaled unshakable certainty in Sicilian culture." Don Greco's fingers drummed the table. Then, impossibly, he smiled. "Your grandfather taught you well." He turned to Sylvio. "The attack on your estate was unauthorized, the actions of hotheads who wanted war more than wisdom. Marco Tesoro has been dealt with by his masters." Maya caught the implication. Marco's benefactors had paid for their treachery. "The blood debt is settled," Don Greco continued. "The Lombardi name is restored. And Signora Finucci has our assurance, no further threats will come from the old country." He stood, and the others followed. "You've chosen your voice wisely, Don Finucci." The celebration at Il Tramonto was unlike anything Little Italy had seen in decades. Every table filled with faces that mattered, bosses from the 5 families, politicians who owed favors, old-world aristocrats who'd flown in from Sicily to witness history. The restaurant where Maya had once refilled water glasses now glittered with her triumph. She stood beside Sylvio at the head table, wearing a gown the color of Sicilian wine, Kora's heirloom emerald pendant at her throat. The same pendant that had been worn by Finucci brides for 5 generations. "You look terrified," Sylvio murmured, his hand finding hers beneath the table. "I spent 4 years trying to be invisible," Maya whispered back. "Now everyone's staring. Let them stare." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "They're staring at the woman who saved my mother's life, who exposed a traitor in my ranks, and who outmaneuvered the Council of Shadows without spilling a drop of blood. You've earned their attention." Kora rose from her seat, and the room fell silent with a reverence usually reserved for papal visits. The old woman raised her wine glass, her voice carrying the weight of authority that came from surviving 7 decades in a world that devoured the weak. "Amici miei," she began in the old dialect, "tonight we celebrate not just a union, but a restoration. The Lombardi name, which was nearly erased from history, returns to us through this remarkable young woman." Her eyes found Maya's. "My son has chosen well. He has chosen strength disguised as gentleness, wisdom hidden behind careful eyes, and courage that doesn't announce itself with guns." Maya's throat tightened as Kora continued. For weeks ago, she was a waitress counting pennies and hiding in shadows. Tonight, she sits at the head of this table as the voice of the Finucci family. She has proven that power isn't always measured in bullets. Sometimes it's measured in the weight of a single word spoken in the right accent at the right moment. The room erupted in applause. Maya felt Sylvio's hand tighten around hers as he stood, pulling her up beside him. To Maya Lombardi Finucci, he said, his voice carrying that dangerous edge that made men obey. My voice. My counsel. My equal. The toast echoed through the restaurant. Salute. As crystal clinked and wine flowed, Maya caught her reflection in the ornate mirror across the room. The terrified girl who'd knocked on Sylvio's study door was gone. In her place stood a queen who'd won her throne with nothing but her grandfather's legacy and her own fierce intelligence. The invisible girl had finally been seen. What an incredible journey we've just witnessed together. Maya went from counting pennies to commanding respect from the most powerful families in the underworld. If you loved this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of romance, power, and redemption. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode. And I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite moment? When Maya spoke the old tongue? Her confrontation with Marco? That final toast? Comment below and let's discuss. Your engagement means the world to me. See you in the next story.